pledged and one rebuilt Gaza. But I guess the international donors don't want to rebuild again if there's a danger for a total or destruction in a few years. And then I'm looking at what are the realistic scenarios. One scenario is the Israelis just stay. So we're on like a pre-2005 situation before Israel pulled out. Then we can see a situation where the PA and Fatah takes over the rule of Gaza. I guess they will be quite reluctant. I don't know what Abu Mazen says in his discussions with you on this. And then the third one could be Fatah, Hamas, but I guess Israel is not very open for that solution. So what is now really the most realistic outcome for Gaza that can also bring humanitarian relief and bring us on the path, as you mentioned, for a two-state solution?
I believe the only way out is a two-state solution. If everybody recognizes that Israelis can only live in peace and security when Palestinians live in peace and security, but the other side is also true. Palestinians can only live in peace and security if Israelis for the future are guaranteed that also they are capable of living in peace and security without any rockets flying anymore. So actually, I would say the answer is there on the table. But the problem is the bridge over the other side of the river. We cannot work together because on the concrete measures right now, it's always this tit for tat. If this doesn't happen first, then this cannot happen. And we have to end this blame game. And I believe, again, it needs actors, different countries, which come together and say, this is the way how we bridge it. And maybe change our course, not asking the question on which side are you on. We are in a black and white situation also in our countries. Yeah, we are so divided on it. If we ask it from the point of the people, and I mean human and foreign politics, it's about the people. If we are, what do the people of Israel, what do the people of Gaza need? And they need, obviously in Gaza, humanitarian access now. So the question, how do we come to the political answers, is that we have to change course on the humanitarian situation. This is why, concretely now for me, German foreign minister, I was saying loud and clear that the access to Gaza has to change. I believe that it's highly important that Ashdod port and Erez can be used as border crossing as well. Obviously, there with checks, but I was standing there besides estimated 3,000 trucks waiting to enter Gaza. People are starving there, and here's the food. So the food and the water has to come in. On the other hand, and this is what I'm discussing with our friends and colleagues, we cannot ignore that the majority of the hostages is still in the hand of Hamas. Some people think, well, the hostages have been freed now. No, the majority is still in the hand of Hamas. So while speaking about humanitarian access to come in because of the people, we have to say together, and this is my call for other countries who haven't addressed it so clearly yet, to call on the freeing of the hostages, so without any conditions. And if we do both together, I believe this could be the step which we need on then further question of the role of Fatah, the role of the PA. I was there, I was speaking about the question of reforming, about the question of holding up elections. I mean, this was also a discussion before that we need obviously elections also in the
But then you can end up with
Bank.
Hamas winning in the West Bank too, can't you?
Well, this is interesting. And this is why I'm, at this moment now, I'm rejecting white and black and white discussions. I mean, this leads nowhere. Yeah, and when I was in Israel this time, I also spoke to researchers, and there were interesting findings. In German media, it was reported that an assessment which has been made in Gaza and in the West Bank, it was reported the majority is now for Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank. When I spoke to the researcher in Israel, actually the finding was it was a majority. If you ask all the people, but it's always the same with polls, the question is, how do you ask the question? And the question, if they would support Hamas in this kind of situation, it was not about 50%. So it was not the majority. Many people obviously said, we don't know. And actually the increase from the support of Hamas, at least to this poll, has increased only by 4 to 6% over the last 3 months. So the rhetoric, which is also there in German and Western media of saying, now there's a big push for Hamas, this is not the finding from the people, because obviously the people are also suffering under Hamas. I mean, they are being misused as a human protection shield. So I think, again, not black and white. We have to address, again, a question for us international players to find a solution. We have to also think, and this is what we are discussing, the day after. So how can we hold election? What would be the precondition? My precondition, obviously, guaranteeing the right of Israel and guaranteeing the right of the Palestinian, live in peace and security. I mean, these are the international rules the Charter of the United Nations was founded on. And the worst thing we could do is just wait and see. For me, this is no option at all. Obviously, it's very difficult to move one step further, but wait and see, we saw now in the last 3 months, just leads to further escalation, and therefore I'm really thankful for the exchange here today.
No, thank you very much. Senator Kunz, in the Arab peace plan, if there was a two-state solution, the Arab countries were guaranteeing also for Israel's security. It was a Palestinian state, but it was a broad regional understanding based also on the global understanding. Listening to Prince Faisal, also the German foreign minister, is there a possibility at all to break the current impasse, both in Gaza? When will the war end? How will it end? And also on the two-state solutions, because there is like almost more than 30 years since the Oslo process now.
Yes, I am optimistic that there is a possibility of peace along that framework. 2 months ago, a group of 10 senators, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, went to Riyadh, met with the Crown Prince, went to Tel Aviv, met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the war cabinet, and other leaders in Israel, went to Cairo and met with President al-Sisi. And the possibility of that regional peace, regional reconciliation with a real path towards a Palestinian state is still there. But the conditions on the ground have gotten worse every single day. The suffering of civilians in Gaza has gotten to an unacceptable level. The refusal to deliver humanitarian assistance at scale has become unacceptable. And the continued holding of hostages by Hamas. There was an encouraging period. Qatar helped facilitate the release of some hostages. There's just also been the delivery of some medicines, but we are a long way from resolving this, and making any positive path forward requires a change, both in the sentiments and the leadership in Israel, as well as the sentiments in the region. The United States can and should play a central and a facilitating role, but we cannot make peace where there are peoples not willing to or committed to. This is a shattering moment for the people of Israel to re-examine whether a strategy of having both Hamas and Fatah in the West Bank and Gaza was wise or unwise, whether or not there is a guarantee of security returning to that, and whether or not it's sustainable globally for Israel to continue this conduct of the war in Gaza. I would argue it is not. There is also a regional actor we have to be clear about. It is Iran that is providing the drones and the missiles that are killing civilians in Ukraine. It is Iran that has provided a lot of the training and the support that makes Houthi drone attacks and missile attacks possible, Hamas attacks possible. And we have to be clear-eyed that there is an accelerating trajectory of difficulty. The DPRK and Iran have provided critical resources to Russia, for which they will be rewarded with technology that will make the world even more dangerous. So I think we need to be decisive. I think we need to be engaged. And I think we need to be clear-eyed. We have talked for a long time about a Palestinian state without making any real progress. And so I think this is a moment for bold action. I agree with much of what the minister had said about a sustainable ceasefire, but the conditions for creating that are going to require some real changes. Our Secretary of State has been throughout the region tirelessly. So too have many other American leaders. I am actually hopeful that this is possible, but hope is not a strategy without significant investment and real change.
Is that possible with the current Israeli government?
Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a career for a long time of opposing a two-state solution. This is not recent. This is not news. So I think it falls to the Israeli people to decide as a democracy what they see as the right path forward. But there's also very short time. There is a short window before the American political election season squeezes out any possibility of us ratifying or engaging or supporting a new security arrangement in the region. There's also many elections in other places. This is the year of many complex and challenging elections. And so I think the time is short.
If there is an agreement, we saw that the JSPOA was just terminated by Trump. So if he was to be reelected and the Biden administration made deals now, could we count on the new administration continuing?
The United States rarely ratifies security treaties, but when we do, we keep them. We have just enacted our Defense Authorization Act. It includes a provision that passed with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. Our ratification of the NATO treaty decades ago was silent about whether or not an American president could unilaterally withdraw America from NATO. It's no longer silent. We have amended the statute. An American president can no longer unilaterally withdraw us from NATO. Why was that done? I think it's clear.
Enlighten me. No. Before I have a follow-up question, but on a different topic, Senator Coons. But Prince Faisal, short reactions from you from what Senator Coons said and also what German Foreign Minister said?
I think what's important to note here is that there is general agreement. And what we need to do is translate that agreement into concrete action. Minister Baerbock very eloquently discussed the fact that peace and security for Israel is intimately linked with peace and security for the Palestinians. And that's something that we have supported in the kingdom since 1981, the phase proposal on peace. So we are fully on board with that. We agree that regional peace includes peace for Israel, but that can only happen through peace for the Palestinians through a Palestinian state. And I hear from Senator Coons exactly the same sentiment. And this is something that we have been indeed working on with the administration, the US administration. And it continues. I think it's even more relevant in the context of Gaza. The fact is that what Israel is doing now is putting the prospects for regional peace and security at risk. There is a pathway towards a much better future for the region, for the Palestinians, and for Israel. That is peace. And we are fully committed to that. But again, the first step for that is ceasefire. And I will say that a ceasefire, of course, means ceasefire on all sides. But that can only happen as should be a starting point towards a permanent, sustainable peace, which can only happen through true justice for the Palestinian people.
Thank you. And I think also the kingdom has said in that context, it could even be recognition of Israel from the kingdom if that was part of a bigger political agreement.
Certainly.
Senator Coons, we had Premier of China speaking this morning. Second largest economy in the world, 20% of the global economy. US, 25% of the global economy, almost 50% altogether. I think one of the few bipartisan topics in DC is the view on China. But following President Biden's and Xi Jinping's meeting in San Francisco during the APEC meeting, there is no broader understanding, at least establish a kind of a floor. So where do you see the relationship between the US and China in the next decade? Will it be, as your president have said, extreme competition, but also agreements on areas where there is common interest? Or will it not only be de-risking, but also in certain areas going into decoupling?
Well, I think to a great extent that will depend on the outcome of our presidential election. I do think President Biden made some real progress in reducing the risk of military encounters in the South China Sea, of profound misunderstandings. We have fundamentally different systems and values, but we are deeply interconnected economically. And reopening military to military lines of communication to reduce the possibility of an unintentional conflict is a positive step. I believe Xi Jinping also heard there was a delegation of senators that went, and he dedicated a great deal of time to a respectful engagement and heard about fentanyl and its consequences in our country, where it is killing huge numbers of Americans. And that has been driving some of the anger at China, is the nationally shared sense of grievance that the PRC was taking no significant steps to reduce the production and export to the United States of fentanyl. Substantive steps have been taken, and that is a positive sign. We need to now figure out how it is that we can find areas of cooperation, whether it's on climate change or on pandemics or on research, while recognizing that we will vigorously compete. We are each taking steps to constrain the other in terms of technology that are raising some concerns in conversations I've had here. But I think it is also worth being clear that in terms of the international rules-based order, China continues to do things in the economic zones of regional neighbors in terms of constraining freedom of navigation, in terms of their view of the international flow of data and the theft of intellectual property that causes us some concerns and some issues. I also think that Xi watches closely the world's response to Putin's aggression against Ukraine. And it's important that we in the United States continue to meet our commitments to Ukraine, that we continue to work in partnership with the 50 other countries that are determined to push back on the invasion of a neighboring sovereign country, and that we continue our work together to find a way that we can de-risk this relationship in a positive direction for the world.
Thank you. We're discussing Middle East, but we're also discussing East-West, but North-South has also been a prominent topic during the last 3 years. There's been a lack of trust between the South and the North. Some people would say it started with, not necessarily, but it accelerated during COVID, where you saw that the Global South did not have access to the most effective vaccines, and the Global North was then seeing vaccination third, fourth times, and they started to vaccinate children, and there were vulnerable groups not having access to vaccines in the Global South. So Minister Tugar, Nigeria, one of the really big powers in the Global South. You listened to the discussion, of course, so far, but is there a way that we can see a reconciliation between the North and the South? And what has to change from the North? Is there anything that has to change from the South? And what would be the fundamentals of that this cooperation, the pillars that this cooperation will be built on? UN Charter, is it international law? It's very interesting to hear also from the new Nigerian administration on this. Minister.
Well, what we have to do is to collectively practice what we preach. So the values that we uphold, democracy, rule of law, need to be practiced, and we need to see them being practiced in the very decision-making bodies or entities for the planet. So to begin with, the UN Security Council, it needs to democratize. Clearly, it is not fit for purpose. Nigeria, you mentioned, is a large country. It is the most populous country on the continent, on the African continent. It has a population of 220 million people. It's going to be 400 by the year 2050. It belongs in a UN Security Council, for instance. And there are several other key decision-making bodies.
With or without veto power?
Permanent.
Yeah.
seat. We
But no more veto powers, huh? Or
we should do away with the veto powers. Clearly, it's clumsy. It's not working. And again, you know, when you look at the global security architecture, it is impacted upon by such undemocratic entities that influence decisions. Again, you have a situation where in the past, when we had a bipolar world, we had neutral ground for diplomats to engage, for diplomacy to be allowed to resolve issues, to preempt conflicts and diffuse them. We don't have that anymore. We no longer have Austria the way it used to be, or Switzerland where we are today, Scandinavia. When I was studying international relations many decades ago, we even had the term Finlandization, you know, and all of that. That no longer exists. So we're increasingly seeing a situation where diplomats and diplomacy are taking the backseat, and disagreements are being securitized, and security chiefs, defense policy makers are taking the front seat. And of course, for the guy with the hammer, everything is a nail. So we end up with increasing conflict. So we need to allow for, of course, you know, some of these things have to do with also the global financial situation, problems to do with the economy. So if a foreign affairs ministry is not deemed to be a revenue generator, then, you know, one that maybe produces weapons and sells and, you know, has more revenue generation takes the forefront. So we really need to allow for diplomats to play a more sort of important role when it comes to dialogue, when it comes to engagement between countries, and that is missing.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. Jens Stoltenberg, first we'll come back to Ukraine, but I asked Senator Coons a question about the US and China, but also the West and China. And last year, Secretary General of NATO spoke about China. That was the first time I've heard. So I think NATO is, of course, first and foremost a transatlantic treaty organization looking at defending its member countries. But I think you also have enlarged also the things that you do address. And how do you react to what Senator Coons said about U.S. relationship with China, and how do you think the West should deal with China?
So first of all, you are right that NATO is a transatlantic alliance, Europe and North America, and we will remain a regional alliance. But the transatlantic region faces global threats. Security is not longer regional, security is global. So what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and what happens in Europe matters for Asia. And therefore, of course, we don't regard China as an adversary, but China's heavy investments in modern military capabilities, including more and more advanced nuclear weapons. China's way of behavior, especially in the South China Sea, and the way China is actually violating core principles for NATO, democracy, the rule of law, journalism, freedom of expression, as we have seen in Hong Kong, all of that matters for NATO. And we also have to understand that this is not about NATO moving into Asia, but it's about the fact that China is coming closer to us. We see them in Africa, we see them in the Arctic, we see them trying to control critical infrastructure. Not so many years ago, I had a big discussion about 5G. And many allies said this is only a commercial issue. No, it's also an issue about our security. So therefore, for all these reasons, of course, NATO has to address what happens in Asia, not because we are a global security alliance, but because what happens there matters for us, and vice versa. I visited Japan and South Korea, close partners of NATO. They are concerned about what happens in Ukraine because they know that the more success Putin has in Ukraine, the more likely it is that Beijing will use force. So we have to have a global approach, even though we are regional countries, regional organizations. The world is interconnected, and of course, NATO has taken the consequence of that.
Thank you. We were at a session together this morning with President Zelensky. Are the Ukrainians winning, or would you say not losing the war in Ukraine?
The situation on the battlefield is extremely difficult. The Russians are now pushing on many front lines, and of course the big offensive that the Ukrainians launched last summer didn't give the results we all hoped for. And we see how Russia is now building up, how they are acquiring drones from Iran, actually building their own drone factory to produce their own drones in Tatarstan with help from Iran, how they get ammunition and ballistic missiles from North Korea. And they have also demonstrated a high tolerance for casualties. So overall, Russia is pushing hard. And this is serious, and we should never underestimate Russia. Having said that, I really believe that there is also cause for optimism. First of all, we have to remember where we started. When this war started with the full-fledged invasion back in 2022, then most experts believed that Russia was going to take Kiev within days and control Ukraine within weeks. That didn't happen. The opposite happened. The Ukrainians pushed back. They liberated the north, the east, and the south, Kherson. They have made big military victories in the Black Sea, opened up a corridor. So now they're actually able to export grain and other stuff through the Black Sea. And we have seen how they've been able to hit both the Russian Air Force and the Russian Navy. These are big military victories for Ukraine. The most important thing is that Ukraine has survived as a sovereign, independent nation, which is a big win for them. And Russia is losing, meaning that Russia has lost what they wanted to achieve with the war, and that was to control Ukraine. The people of Ukraine have never trusted Russia less than they do today, and they want to be part of the West, of the European Union and NATO, and they're closer to us than ever before. And this is a big loss for Russia. We have to support them. And I'm also quite confident that NATO allies will continue to provide support. Because support for Ukraine is not charity. Support for Ukraine is investment in our own security. And therefore, allies have provided unprecedented support. Now we are ramping up production. There was just an agreement now to acquire close to 1,000 new interceptors for the Patriot batteries. One example of how allies are stepping up to refill their own stocks, but also be able to support Ukraine in the future. So we just have to stand by Ukraine, and some stage Russia will understand that they are paying a too high price and sit down and agree to some kind of just peace. But we need to stand by Ukraine.
Thank you. You're also a Secretary General of NATO. You're on top of all of the juicy intelligence. We heard this morning that Russia has lost like more than 200 soldiers, half of their tanks in Ukraine. Say that again?
300,000.
300,000. Yeah. So, and half of their tanks. And it's, of course, also having severe impact on their economy. It's said in the morning it's a war economy. So you can then use the traditional measures. But with what you're hearing also as Secretary General of NATO, are the Russians aware, you think, that this war did not go as planned and are aware of all the casualties? And, for a nation that has lost half of their tanks and 300,000 soldiers, that's not a minor thing. Is there something happening in Russia, or is it just not?
I'm very careful predicting about both how the war will develop. Wars are by nature unpredictable, and I'm even more careful about predicting what will happen inside Russia. We saw Prigozhin last year. Surprises may happen, but we don't have any indications or any big change inside Russia, but of course there can be surprises. Again, I think what really matters is what we do, and we just have to do whatever we can to increase the price for Russia. And of course, when they had lost 300,000 soldiers, casualties, thousands of armed vehicles, hundreds of planes, this is something that matters for Russia and for ordinary Russians. Their economy is struggling. They are paying a high economic price. They are paying a high political price. They're more politically isolated, also in the near abroad, in Caucasus and Central Asia. And so what we can do is not to predict with certainty what will happen, but what we can do is to just maximize the likelihood that at some stage President Putin will understand that to continue this war will have a too high price, and then at some stage he has to sit down and negotiate some kind of just lasting peace where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. And the paradox is that if we want that to happen, a peaceful, just end to this war, the way to get there is more weapons to Ukraine. So the more credible we are in our military support, the more likely it is that the diplomats will succeed. Because what happens around the negotiating table with diplomats is so closely linked to the situation on the battlefield. There are no indications that Putin is planning for peace now, but he will when he realizes that we will not give up, that we have the military strength to support Ukraine, and then he will sit down and the diplomats can take over.
Thank you, Jens. In the morning meeting, someone also said that Putin is the father of the modern Ukraine. But Minister Elina Valtonen of Finland, I guess Finland would not have become a NATO member if it wasn't for Putin's war on Ukraine.
Yeah, probably not. We never kind of saw the need for that, even though, well, personally, I have been in favor of that for decades, but not all of us Finns. And we thought that we would be able to defend ourselves and deter Russia based on our strong own defense forces. But I have to say, I mean, in this narrative, and perhaps also what my colleague from Nigeria referred to, I'm not hugely proud of the Finnish piece of history of the Finlandization. And that's got nothing to do with diplomacy. It was enforced on us. I mean, living next to a huge neighbor who is not only unpredictable, but very aggressive. And we've had our past where we have had to defend our country against the aggression and the invasion from back then Soviet Union. Luckily, we were able to remain independent, never were part of the Soviet Union. But those few decades where we really had to, constrain our sovereignty in order to remain independent, that's not based on the UN Charter, right? I mean, every sovereign nation has the right to decide on themselves, or more precisely, those people living in those democracies, they have the right. And that is exactly that the Ukrainians are now fighting for, because they decided more than 10 years ago, the Ukrainian people, they want to have a European future. They want to have a future where each individual counts. They can decide on their own future. And that's why we need to assist them, because nobody wants to have a world where only the strongest, the most powerful are to decide. And I'm sure that applies to Nigeria just as much as it applies to the 5 million people of Finland. And only, just finally, NATO does not enlarge by force. It is the free people in democratic nations who choose to join. And that goes for Finland and Sweden just like anybody else. And we didn't join because we wanted to threaten Russia. Come on, 5 million Finns threatening Russia, come on. It's never happened in the future. Don't believe that narrative. We are there in order to protect our values and stand up for the UN Charter.
You just told me that you had to close the border again towards Russia for another month?
That's right. Well, yeah, we've experienced, especially after the summer, some increasing, let's say, harassment from Russia. So now there's this hybrid operation going on where Russia has not only let third country citizens enter Finland, cross our border without valid documentation, But they have also been, or we have evidence that they are actively mobilizing those people, also direct from their original countries. And that's obviously not something we can accept. It's part of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And plus, Finland is obviously not only protecting its own border, but also that of the EU and NATO. Many of those people who have entered our country, are criminals or have even war criminal records, and some of them, many of them stay in Finland. They have, all of them seek asylum, but many also continue on towards the rest of the Schengen area. And of course, we can't have that happen.
Time is up, but Minister Tugar, I think you wanted a short reply. I would have loved to continue another half an hour, but I learned, though, in my political past that you should always end when people still want you to continue. I'm not sure all politicians stick to that, but Minister Tugar, and then I'll do a very, very short closing.
Yeah, so real quickly, not a reply, just a reaction. I spoke about Finlandization within the context of a bipolar world and ways to avert conflicts, and in this case, nuclear annihilation. So perhaps that was the price that we had to pay. It was regrettable, but the point I was trying to make was the need for there to be neutral ground for diplomats, for countries to engage with each other to avert conflict. So, but I couldn't agree more with the minister with regards to freedom of self-determination, because what you described could apply exactly to Palestine. They have the right. They have the right to, self-determination, the same way that Finland.
Fully
so
agree.
we could, but I don't want us to keep on, nitpicking and picking and choosing which conflicts to highlight. What is important is also that we pay close attention to proxy wars and actions and the use of proxies to foment conflicts in third-party nations. So this is something that is happening that we see increasingly, and unless the diplomats engage with each other, you cannot diffuse such tensions. But we need to roll that back as quickly as possible.
No, thank you very much, Minister. I feel extremely privileged to have had the chance to moderate such a panel. Great leaders in their different fields. The title was, as I said at the beginning, Securing an Insecure World. I think we took a small step forward in at least establishing some potential pillars for what a more secure world could be. And to you, Minister from Nigeria, also on the diplomacy, I think we need more diplomacy and not less diplomacy, and both in Gaza, Ukraine, US, China, North, South, East, West. It doesn't hurt to talk. It doesn't hurt to have a dialogue. And that is what we're trying also here in Davos. I'm being asked 3 times this morning about people that are invited to Davos. Why did they invite her? Why did we invite him? We don't agree with them. Exactly, that's why they're here, because we can have a dialogue. If you only then deal with the people you agree with, then there will be conflicts. There will be no further understanding. And of course, that's part of the whole disinformation agenda. If you look at something, the algorithms just make sure that you look even more at something that is even more extreme than you look at. Maybe it wasn't extreme at all, but it was a little bit edgy. So thank you very much to the panel. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Give them a big applause. Good afternoon. Welcome to the session on securing an insecure world. Of course, I'm biased, but if it is one session in Davos you should go to, it is this one. So you done a good choice. And with this panel, I think we're also gonna get enlightened. We are faced with the most complex geopolitical backdrop in any Davos in the last decades. I like the title, how we can make an insecure world a bit more secure. On my left, I have Annalena Baerbock, Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs, Germany. Then we have His Highness Faisal Al Saud, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Saudi Arabia. Then we have Senator Chris Coons from the US, Delaware, the former seat of President Biden. Then we have Youssef Tugar, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria. Welcome, Minister. How many days have you been in the job?
Sounds like forever, but
Yeah,
only since August.
Yeah, they say being foreign minister, they're dog years. I think dog years is like 7, is it? So then we go also to the Finnish Foreign Minister, Elina Valtonen. Welcome. And then I think it doesn't need that much presentation, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. So give them an applause. So we start on a little bit of a positive note. We will have to touch on the situation in the Middle East, the danger of escalation, latest development in the Red Sea, but of course also the ongoing war in Gaza. We will also have to touch on the other war in Ukraine. We'll also have to touch on what we just heard this morning, China's premier and the G2, US, China, but also the order that we left is gone, the post-Cold War order. We're between orders, so we don't really know what the new order will be. Hopefully not the jungle growing back, but something based on international law and the UN Charter. So we will also touch on that. And then I think 45 minutes are gone. So without any further ado, Your Highness, Minister Faisal, where to start and end? How worried are you about the situation in the Red Sea? It's one of the major transportation canals of the world. We're seeing no ships going around Africa instead of in the canal. Was it necessary to take the steps we did know? Are you supportive of them? And you have been trying to rein in the Houthis for quite a while, haven't you?
I think we're incredibly concerned for regional security in general. And of course, freedom of navigation in the Red Sea is something that impacts all of us. And we think the priority needs to be de-escalation in the Red Sea, but in the entire region. And we are going to engage to make that happen. And part of that, of course, is also making sure that we engage with all stakeholders.
How connected is this with the war in Gaza?
I mean, it's clearly connected, given that it's coming in that context. And in any case, we need to focus on the war in Gaza, not because of the Red Sea. We need to focus on the war in Gaza because of its impact on the Palestinians first, but on regional security in general, and on the risks that it poses for further escalation. And we've seen now close to 30,000 civilians killed in Gaza. We continue to see civilians being killed every day. We continue to see restrictions on access to humanitarian aid. And frankly, we don't see any real sign that any strategic objectives that Israel has claimed are being coming any closer. So we need to have a ceasefire immediately. We need to set the ground for a credible process that enables the Palestinian Authority, that allows us to have a process towards a peace in the region. This will resolve many of the challenges that we have in the region. But continuing as we are now, continuing to see the suffering that's happening in Gaza is likely to lead to continuing cycles of escalation.
I think many of us were a bit relieved that it did not escalate the situation in Gaza to Lebanon. But what we're seeing now is it has kind of escalated to Yemen and has impact on the navigation in the Red Sea. You also in the kingdom had the rapprochement with Iran. Are you surprised that of the role in Iran when it comes to this situation and with the escalation with the Houthis, or are they not that involved?
I can't speak for the Iranians, but what I can say, again, I just want to make clear that our priority and our emphasis is on finding the path to de-escalation. And that is primarily, in our view, through a ceasefire in Gaza. That is through serious engagement across the region. But we need to focus on the immediate crisis. The immediate crisis is the suffering that's happening in Gaza. We're continuing to see that going on. We don't see any real prospects for that ending. And I'm somewhat heartened to see that the international community has been moving more in the direction that we have called for since the beginning, which is calling for ceasefires, which is calling for more humanitarian aid. But we need to do more. Clearly, not enough has been done because the killing continues and the suffering continues.
Minister Baerbock, I think you visited the region, Israel, and the Palestinian areas also 4 times since 7th of October. You hear what His Highness is saying, that we now need a ceasefire, we need to de-escalate. What's your take on what the minister just said?
Well, also the two of us, but with many colleagues and friends, we have been in constant contact in the last 3 months, because in my assessment, this is a total disaster. It's a disaster for Israel. It's a disaster for the civilians in Gaza. It's a disaster for the whole world. And we are working non-stop at foreign minister level at the moment to prevent that just a spark could burn the whole region. And not only the region, I mean, we feel the consequences also in Ukraine. We feel the consequences that in Europe, media is not reporting about the most heavy attacks from Russia on civilians in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion. We feel the consequences. I traveled after I've been last week to Israel, to Gaza, Rafah border crossing, and also to the neighboring countries. I went to the Philippines and Malaysia. We as Germany feel the consequences there, because in Malaysia I'm being asked, so do you have any sentiments against Muslim countries, because you are not calling for a ceasefire in the wording my dear colleague and friend Prince Faisal has putting it. We are calling for a sustainable ceasefire, because I believe that a ceasefire, unfortunately, doesn't fall from the sky. We can only reach a ceasefire if both sides are ready that the suffering for oneself also ends the suffering from the others. And my assessment, and actually not only assessment, I'm really emotional about this, because we are speaking about children still in hostage with Hamas in Gaza, 1-year-old child. We're speaking about a boy I just saw in Al Arish hospital when I was there. When I went from Gaza crossing Rafah to the hospital, 10 kilometers away, at the same moment, a 5-year-old boy came by ambulance, waiting for weeks that he could come to Egypt to be treated in the hospital. I just entered, only with his mother and his baby sister. The whole rest of family have been killed. And the discussion about the ceasefire sounds so technical, but it's about saving these children, those children still being hostage, those children suffering under the humanitarian disaster. And I believe the problem we are in is actually we know the solution. We can only come out together on a plan on the ceasefire, on a plan on a two-state solution. But at the moment, we are stuck in a vicious circle. Because the vicious circle means you cannot say, but you have to start or you have to start. It has to come all together. The freeing of the hostages, the ending of the humanitarian situation, the question, and this is where we might disagree, that there has to be the call from the whole international community that Hamas has to lay down its weapon so Israel is not threatened from Gaza anymore. And obviously, and this is what others are asking from us, like Germany standing with Israel's right to self-defense, obviously this includes also a change of strategy that not so many civilians are dying. And at the moment, we are stuck in this vicious circle, and we have to find, and I think this is our obligation as an international community of those who believe in the rule of law, to find the solution to come out of this vicious circle. Yeah, and this is why I'm traveling, many colleagues are traveling all around the clock to come to peace, not only for the region, but I would say for the whole world.
Well, thank you. Isn't it the danger that the humanitarian sufferings in Gaza will just continue and continue until there is a political solution? Because during the two former Gaza wars, there were conferences after where there was a lot of money pledged and one rebuilt Gaza. But I guess the international donors don't want to rebuild again if there's a danger for a total or destruction in a few years. And then I'm looking at what are the realistic scenarios. One scenario is the Israelis just stay. So we're on like a pre-2005 situation before Israel pulled out. Then we can see a situation where the PA and Fatah takes over the rule of Gaza. I guess they will be quite reluctant. I don't know what Abu Mazen says in his discussions with you on this. And then the third one could be Fatah, Hamas, but I guess Israel is not very open for that solution. So what is now really the most realistic outcome for Gaza that can also bring humanitarian relief and bring us on the path, as you mentioned, for a two-state solution?
I believe the only way out is this two-state solution. If everybody recognizes that Israelis can only live in peace and security when Palestinians live in peace and security, but the other side is also true. Palestinians can only live in peace and security if Israelis for the future are guaranteed that also they are capable of living in peace and security without any rockets flying anymore. So actually, I would say the answer is there on the table. But the problem is the bridge over the other side of the river. We cannot walk together because on the concrete measures right now, it's always this tit for tat. If this doesn't happen first, then this cannot happen. And we have to end this blame game. And I believe, again, it needs actors, different countries, which come together and say, this is the way how we bridge it. And maybe change our course, not asking the question, on which side are you on? We are in a black and white situation also in our countries. Yeah, we are so divided on it. If we ask it from the point of the people, and I mean human and foreign politics, it's about the people. If we are, what do the people of Israel, what do the people of Gaza need? And they need, obviously in Gaza, humanitarian access now. So the question, how do we come to the political answers, is that we have to change course on the humanitarian situation. This is why, concretely now for me, German foreign minister, I was saying loud and clear that the access to Gaza has to change. I believe that it's highly important that Ashdod port and Erez can be used as border crossing as well. Obviously, there with checks, but I was standing there besides estimated 3,000 trucks waiting to enter Gaza. People are starving there, and here's the food. So the food and the water has to come in. On the other hand, and this is what I'm discussing with our friends and colleagues, we cannot ignore that the majority of the hostages is still in the hand of Hamas. Some people think, well, the hostages have been freed now. No, the majority is still in the hand of Hamas. So while speaking about humanitarian access to come in because of the people, we have to say together, and this is my call for other countries who haven't addressed it so clearly yet, to call on the freeing of the hostages, so without any conditions. And if we do both together, I believe this could be the step which we need on then further question of the role of Fatah, the role of the PA. I was there, I was speaking about the question of reforming, about the question of holding up elections. I mean, this was also a discussion before, that we need obviously elections also in the
But then
in
you
the
can
West
end up
Bank.
with Hamas winning in the West Bank too, can't you?
Well, this is interesting, and this is why I'm, at this moment now, I'm rejecting white and black and white discussions. I mean, this leads nowhere. Yeah, and when I was in Israel this time, I also spoke to researchers, and there were interesting findings. In German media, it was reported that an assessment which has been made in Gaza and in the West Bank, it was reported the majority is now for Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank. When I spoke to the researcher in Israel, actually the finding was it was a majority. If you ask all the people, but it's always the same with polls, the question is, how do you ask the question? And the question, if they would support Hamas in this kind of situation, it was not about 50%. So it was not the majority. Many people obviously said, we don't know. And actually the increase from the support of Hamas, at least to this poll, has increased only by 4 to 6% over the last 3 months. So the rhetoric, which
dispuestos a enviar hombres y mujeres para defender a otro Estado, a otra nación. Si queremos luchar contra Putin en años venideros, ¿no sería mejor frenarlo a él y a esta estrategia bélica que tiene, mientras nuestros hombres y mujeres valientes ya lo están haciendo y combatiendo? Ellos son la oportunidad que necesita el mundo. Sin duda, en cualquier enfrentamiento, confrontación, siempre hay un momento en el que puede frenarse una catástrofe. Y Ucrania es esa oportunidad. En el mundo libre, todos debemos ser inquebrantables a la hora de perseguir nuestros deseos, acciones y metas, de la misma manera que Putin tiene estas ambiciones apocalípticas. Nosotros, los ucranianos, empezamos a defendernos en un momento en el que casi nadie en el mundo creía en Ucrania. Pero hemos cambiado las tornas para que ahora el mundo deje de creer en Rusia. Incluso los colegas de Putin en Pyongyang y en Teherán utilizan su locura mientras todavía tiene tecnología y recursos para pagarles. Nadie cree en su futuro o invierte en ello. Y nosotros, todos nosotros hoy aquí, incluso más que ayer, debemos invertir en acercar la paz, una paz que sea justa y estable. Antes de esa invasión a gran escala, siempre oíamos que nos decían, no escalen. Cuando pedimos acciones más proactivas, sanciones para prevenir la expansión de la guerra, nos decían, no escalen. Y después del 24 de febrero, No hubo nada que dañase más nuestras coaliciones que esta noción. Cada vez que se nos decía que no escalásemos, sonaba como que nosotros venceríamos a Putin. Cuando pedimos nuevos tipos de armas y la respuesta era no escalen, bueno, pues las armas llegaron y no se produjo ninguna escalada. Llegó un misil ruso sobre territorio de la OTAN y la respuesta fue no escalen. Pero una represalia, algún tipo de represalia en aquel momento podría haber enseñado a Rusia muchísimo y hubiese aportado mayor confianza a Oeste. Hemos hablado del bloqueo de bienes sujetos a sanciones a Kaliningrado, pero siempre se nos decía que no escalásemos. Las sanciones podrían haber forzado a Putin con sus concesiones, pero con este tema de la no escalada siempre se pierde tiempo. Se han perdido muchísimas vidas, muchas desde que empezamos a luchar en 2014. Se han perdido muchas oportunidades. La lección es clara aquí. Todo el mundo pensaba que Rusia tenía misiles que no se podían abatir. Los Patriots abaten todo. Muchos temían las consecuencias si Ucrania tenía armas de largo alcance y como resultado Rusia perdería más. Hemos escuchado que Rusia nunca permitiría un corredor para cereales y luego pues casi 16 millones de toneladas de cargamento han sido transportadas desde nuestros puertos y hemos podido demostrar que Rusia pues ha tenido que aceptar la pérdida completa de su flota del Mar Negro, que ha aterrorizado a nuestros buques comerciales. Y también debemos obtener superioridad aérea para Ucrania, como lo hemos logrado en el Mar Negro. Y podemos hacerlo. Nuestros socios saben lo que se necesita y en qué cantidades. Y esto nos permitirá avanzar sobre el terreno. Hace 2 días, señoras y señores, justamente solo hace 2 días, demostramos que Ucrania puede llegar a los aviones militares más valiones rusos, algo que nunca se había batido antes. Hay muchas sanciones que se postergaron durante meses, incluso años, porque temían las amenazas de Moscú. Pero ninguna de esas amenazas se ha hecho realidad. Cada una de esas amenazas era un farol. ¿Y cómo podemos quedarnos satisfechos con las sanciones contra Rusia si no bloquean ni siquiera la producción de misiles? Si en cada misil ruso hay elementos, componentes críticos de países occidentales. Y eso es cierto, es un hecho. Por supuesto que estoy muy agradecido para cualquier paquete de sanciones y gracias a todos nuestros asociados, pero acercar la paz será la recompensa para todos aquellos que quieran asegurarse de que las sanciones funcionen al 100%. Y por cierto, hemos visto que hay una debilidad clara de Occidente. Por ejemplo, cuando la industria nuclear de Rusia todavía no está sometida a sanciones. Cuando Putin es el único terrorista que tomó una central nuclear como rehén. Este año será una decisión importante cuando los activos rusos se congelen, soberanos y oligárquicos, y se dirijan a defendernos contra la guerra rusa para la construcción. A Putin le encanta el dinero. Cuantos más miles de millones él tenga y sus amigos y sus cómplices, y cuanto más dinero pierda, más se arrepentirá de esta guerra. Putin debe arrepentirse, debe perder. Debemos rebatir la idea de que la unidad global es más débil que el odio de un único hombre. Y podemos hacerlo, señoras y señores. Podemos. Este año debe ser decisivo. ¿Puede el hecho de congelar la guerra en Ucrania ser su fin? No quiero conformarme con la obviedad de que si se congela un conflicto, a lo mejor no empieza de nuevo. Les recuerdo que después de 2014 hubo intentos para congelar la guerra en Donbass. Había garantores muy influenciales en el proceso, con mucha influencia, como era el canciller de Alemania y el presidente de Francia en aquella época. Pero Putin es un depredador que no se conforma con productos congelados. Tenemos que defendernos y defender a nuestros hijos, nuestras casas, nuestras vidas. Y debemos hacerlo y podemos hacerlo. Podemos ganarle sobre el terreno. Ya lo hemos demostrado. Por mar y por aire. Hemos acelerado la producción de armas, hemos fortalecido nuestra economía, el PIB sigue aumentando pese a la guerra, un 5% más en comparación con el año pasado. Se nos ha aceptado para la negociación, para la adhesión a la Unión Europea y hemos normalizado la idea de que podemos combatir y derribar las agresiones de Rusia. Y ahora nosotros somos los que podemos decir, no escalen a todos aquellos que duden o que no quieran darnos apoyo. Y con ello, creo que tendremos razón, porque cada vez que reducimos la presión sobre la agresión, añade años y años a la guerra. Pero cada vez que invertimos en tener una mayor confianza en nuestros defensores, reduciremos el tiempo de la guerra. Este año debemos tomar una de las decisiones más importantes. La guerra va a terminar con una paz justa y estable. Y yo quiero que ustedes formen parte de este proceso de paz, empezando aquí, ahora, para acercarnos a la paz. Y les necesitamos a ustedes en Ucrania para reconstruir nuestras vidas. Cada uno de ustedes pueden tener más éxito con Ucrania. Y aquí, estos días, en un país tan maravilloso como es Suiza, hemos hecho una aportación política crucial para poner fin a la guerra. Hemos tenido una de las reuniones más representativas con consejeros de seguridad nacional en cuanto a la aplicación de una fórmula de paz que cuenta con más de 80 países e instituciones internacionales que estuvieron presentes. Ayer tuve unas negociaciones muy productivas con el presidente de Suiza. Tratamos la posibilidad de que se celebre una cumbre de alto nivel en Suiza, una cumbre mundial para la paz. Hoy nuestros equipos ya han empezado a trabajar para organizar dicha cumbre. No una cumbre sobre la Tercera Guerra Mundial, sino una cumbre mundial para la paz. E invito a cada líder y a cada país que respete la paz y el derecho internacional para que se sume a nuestros esfuerzos, porque juntos podemos responder a cualquiera de estos temas cruciales y encontrar las mejores respuestas. La paz debe ser la respuesta. Gracias por la invitación, gracias por su atención. Slava Ucrania.
Señor presidente, creo que habrá podido detectar el calor de este público que tenemos hoy aquí. Nunca había visto esta sala tan llena. Muchísimas gracias por este discurso histórico que acaba de pronunciar usted en Davos. Creo que todos sabemos que estamos viviendo un momento histórico. El presidente Zelensky es una de las figuras históricas de nuestra época y defenderse y plantarle cara a Rusia, uno de los poderes militares más importantes del mundo, como ha hecho usted y su gente, es un hecho histórico, sin duda alguna. También Debemos pensar en los próximos capítulos. Ha mencionado usted mismo que la economía de Ucrania sigue creciendo a un ritmo superior al 5%. También ha mencionado usted que Rusia ha sufrido muchas pérdidas, más de 300.000 soldados, más de la mitad de los tanques y la flota del Mar Negro ha perdido Rusia. Y mientras escuchaba yo me preguntaba, ¿cuánto tiempo permitirá el pueblo ruso que Putin siga por este camino? Gracias por esta pregunta. Una pregunta francamente interesante. No se preocupe, tengo tiempo hasta mañana. Yo espero lo que haga falta. Pero tiene que ganar la guerra usted. Tengo mucho trabajo, pero no se preocupe. ¿Puedo hablar ya en ucraniano? ¿En ucraniano? Sí. Todo el mundo entiende el ucraniano ahora ya, ¿verdad? Pues muchísimas gracias. Sí, gracias a la interpretación. Hablaremos de temas muy serios. Pero a veces hace falta hacer un poquito de pausa para dar espacio al sentido del humor. Ahora es gracioso porque estoy hablando en inglés y tengo al traductor de ucraniano que me habla al oído. Gracias a las tecnologías. Es gracioso. Es muy gracioso. Pero no me gusta escuchar mi voz, así que, bueno, vamos a seguir en ucraniano porque si no, esto es un poco complicado. Sí, yo quería responder en mi propio idioma y querría explicarle que a veces cuesta entender qué diferencias hay entre nosotros, ustedes y este hombre, Putin. La diferencia entre la autocracia y la democracia, como ha dicho usted, era ¿cuánto tiempo permitirá el pueblo ruso que Putin continúe haciendo eso? Y luego, pues, es que da igual si sea la guerra, las elecciones o que él siga encabezando el Estado. No, nosotros lo vemos igual, ¿no? ¿Cuánto tiempo permitirá el pueblo? Eso es el principio de la democracia, pero la diferencia está ahí. Su pueblo no permite nada al presidente de Rusia. Él lo ve de otra manera. La cuestión es saber qué permite el presidente Putin a su pueblo, con lo cual deberíamos plantear la pregunta de otra manera. ¿Durante cuánto tiempo estará la gente dispuesta a cerrar los ojos, a cerrar los oídos, a no ver ni escuchar nada, a hacer ver que todo va bien y que todo avanza correctamente? Esa no es una pregunta para mí, es una pregunta que debo lanzar a los ciudadanos de la Federación Rusa. Hay que saber si estas personas son capaces de cambiar o no. Esto es lo que yo intentaba decir. Yo no creo que Putin sea capaz de cambiar, porque solo los seres humanos son capaces de cambiar. Muy interesante. Pues probaré con otra pregunta. Sí, inténtelo. Sí, yo soy realista. Sabemos que la Unión Europea y Estados Unidos hace 1 o 2 semanas que han frenado el apoyo que proporcionaban a Ucrania. Sé que se ha reunido con líderes europeos, con la presidenta von der Leyen y con algunos de los principales dirigentes estadounidenses aquí. ¿Les preocupa a usted que todas estas negociaciones estén prolongándose tanto, se estén dilatando, o solamente es una cuestión de semanas antes de conseguir que se resuelva esta cuestión del retraso en la ayuda? Gracias por esta pregunta, porque yo creo que es una cuestión de semanas. He recibido señales muy positivas en el sentido de que los países de la Unión Europea nos respaldan y creo que también podremos resolver la cuestión respecto a la ayuda de los Estados Unidos en el Congreso. Ha habido muchas reuniones, deliberaciones y no estamos perdiendo un tiempo que para nosotros es tan precioso. En esta época de guerra, para nosotros es muy importante estar en nuestro país. Desde luego también es importante estar aquí y reunirse con unas y otras personas, pero en épocas de guerra las prioridades son las que son. Así que estoy convencido de que habrá reacciones positivas de nuestros socios. No vamos a permitir que Rusia nos ocupe y gracias a nuestros luchadores y a nuestros guerreros nos mantendremos firmes. Hay una lista de reformas y propuestas también de la Unión Europea, del Fondo Monetario Internacional y Ucrania va cumpliendo con esas peticiones ahora con mucha más rapidez que antes de la guerra porque nos hemos reagrupado, porque los ucranianos han demostrado que son capaces de ser fuertes y reformar su Estado incluso en época de guerra. Quisiera hacer un breve recordatorio. Cuando Putin atacó, diciendo que era bajo esas falsas alegaciones de que iba a atacar a Ucrania, ustedes consiguieron recuperar después de los ataques el 50% de los territorios ocupados por Rusia. Así que también es importante recordarnos que eso lo hicieron ustedes incluso antes de conseguir el respaldo armamentístico de Occidente. Todo eso fue gracias a su ejército muy potente. De hecho, debe ser el sexto o séptimo ejército más potente del mundo. ¿Puede usted hablarnos de cuál es el sentimiento que reina en su país, entre su pueblo? ¿Cómo se siente el pueblo ucraniano tras 2 años de guerra? ¿Se mantiene el mismo grado de compromiso? ¿Ha aumentado el grado de compromiso de estas personas tras las atrocidades vistas y los últimos bombardeos de civiles? Porque usted también tiene que ocuparse de gestionar la situación con su propia población, ¿no? Gracias por formularme esta pregunta, que en el fondo es bastante difícil, porque para empezar, el pueblo de Ucrania no perdonará nunca a Putin ni a todos los que han cometido estos actos terroristas y le han respaldado, y a todos aquellos que nos han robado nuestra vida, la vida de nuestra gente, de nuestros hijos, y que han perjudicado tanto a estos chicos y chicas que han tenido que se les ha robado la infancia y se les ha convertido en adultos demasiado pronto. Expreso quiero dar mi condolencia a todas las personas que han sufrido en esta guerra y a todos los familiares de los que han fallecido en esta guerra. El tiempo juega a favor de Putin y se piensa, ¿no? Y que los ucranianos se cansarán. No, ni él, ni sus hijos, ni sus nietos no podrán descansar en paz. Nosotros no somos terroristas. Hay procesos jurídicos legales establecidos para exigir la rendición de cuentas, porque si no, después de esta agresión vendrán otros autócratas que también actuarán en la misma línea si no hay consecuencias. Por eso, nadie va a perdonarle nunca nada a nadie. Pero la venganza no es el motor que anima a los ucranianos. No podemos comparar para nada la venganza con la justicia. Estamos hablando solo de la justicia, no de la venganza. La justicia tiene que expresarse en sentencias que reflejen los años, las fechas y los lugares donde estas personas que nos han agredido tendrán que pasar unas largas vacaciones. La cuestión es la injusticia y la moral de los ucranianos está inspirada por su deseo de libertad, de ser libres, de que se respeten los derechos humanos, de que cada uno pueda decidir cómo desea vivir, a quién desea amar, a quién desea escoger, dónde desea descansar. Estas decisiones son lo que inspira a los ucranianos a luchar. La libertad es el motor que nos hace luchar con tanto valor. Estamos luchando a favor de nuestros valores comunes. Cuesta mucho entender el valor que tienen estos principios cuando uno no vive una guerra. Es tan importante su apoyo, no pueden ustedes imaginárselo. Es muy importante que todos entendamos el valor que encierran todos estos principios antes de vivir una agresión. Si conseguimos defender Ucrania y aislar a Putin, estaremos dando los pasos políticos adecuados para que esta guerra no se extienda a otros países. Porque eso es lo que quiere Putin. Tiene una población esclava de gente pobre y no consigue crear una economía de mercado en Rusia. No lo ha conseguido. No ha conseguido que la sociedad empobrecida pueda convertirse en clase media, que puedan disfrutar de su vida, puedan disfrutar de sus cosas, y por eso les ha propuesto esta solución, que es una locura. En el Kremlin se está enviando unas noticias que son falsas. Y si no puede ganar la guerra, argumenta que está triunfando en otros aspectos, con sus asesinatos, con sus ocupaciones, etc. Lamento haber dado una respuesta tan larga a su breve pregunta. Sí, pero el público está aquí para escucharle a usted y no a mí, no se preocupe en extenderse. Creo, señor presidente, que esta ha sido una magnífica manera de poner punto final casi a esta sesión. Pero una breve pregunta. Esta mañana hemos hablado con 70 consejeros delegados de empresas que estaban reunidos. ¿Cómo podemos todos nosotros contribuir a hacer realidad los principios que usted ha descrito y cómo podemos todos ayudar a Ucrania? Yo he sido muy sincero con ustedes. Creo que el principal tesoro de Ucrania son sus ciudadanos. Hemos demostrado al mundo que somos modernos, que tenemos talentos, que somos inteligentes, que somos valientes, que somos listos, que somos personas abiertas. Es imprescindible que creemos una economía resiliente y solo nuestra gente con sus inversiones lo podrán hacer realidad. Necesitamos puestos de trabajo, necesitamos inversiones normales y corrientes. Empresas que vengan y se instalen o que inviertan con total transparencia, porque eso generará nuevos puestos de trabajo, eso nos ayudará, eso ayudará a que muchos que están viviendo fuera puedan volver a nuestro país. Y tal y como he dicho ya, Putin solo ha conseguido entrar en aquellas aldeas donde no había gente o asesinaron a los viejos. En aquellas aldeas y pueblos y ciudades donde había población dispuesta a defender su tierra, no consiguió entrar Putin y las autoridades rusas. Así que les pido que, por favor, defiendan nuestra economía e inviertan en nuestra economía para defender a nuestra gente. Gracias. Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente Zelensky. Ha sido... ¿Lo ve? ¿Lo ve? Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Sus Excelencias, señoras y señores, queridos amigos, les pido que se sumen a mí y que le den la bienvenida a Volodymyr Zelensky, el presidente de Ucrania. Señor presidente, después de haber tenido el placer de recibirle en los 2 últimos años con sus importantes declaraciones, es un honor para mí de nuevo darle la bienvenida a Davos. Usted hará su intervención. En el 2020 estuve con nosotros y ya habló de que la mayor amenaza para un mundo cohesivo y sostenible era la seguridad. También habló de las consecuencias de que se aceptase una nueva normalidad. A la vez, había partes de su país que ya habían estado ocupados parcialmente durante 6 años. Señor presidente, la agresión brutal el 24 de febrero de 2022 nos recordó que no podemos contar con una prosperidad mundial sin paz y seguridad. Casi 2 años desde la guerra y Ucrania sigue firme. Su pueblo sigue a pie de cañón defendiendo su independencia. Gracias a su liderazgo, señor presidente, y su resolución, la resolución también de cada ciudadano ucraniano, su país sigue siendo muy resiliente a la hora de responder a la guerra y estamos eternamente agradecidos a usted y al pueblo ucraniano por defender los valores que están al centro del sistema internacional y en el corazón de la democracia liberal. En 2022, a Ucrania se le garantizó la condición de candidato y empezaron ya el mes pasado las conversaciones para su adhesión a la Unión Europea. Sin duda, Ucrania está muy comprometida a favor de la integración europea como resultado de las políticas de su gobierno y sus políticas. Estamos deseando escuchar con interés su intervención y lo que le depara a Ucrania. Y no solo el futuro para Ucrania, sino también para Europa y el mundo. Señor presidente, tiene usted la palabra. Muchas gracias. Profesor Schwab, gracias por su amable presentación. Presidente Brendan, señoras y señores, agradezco su interés y entiendo que están deseando escuchar la respuesta a muchas preguntas que son muy importantes. ¿Cuándo terminará la guerra? Si es posible que se produzca una tercera guerra mundial, si es momento de negociar con Putin. La guerra a gran escala en Europa lleva ya 2 años. Desde la anexión ilegal de Rusia de Crimea, ya han pasado casi 10 años y durante ese tiempo Rusia ha estado interfiriendo en países africanos desde el Sudán hasta Malí. La guerra en Siria sigue sangrando a causa de la decisión de Putin de demostrar algo al mundo y lleva ya casi 13 años. De hecho, un hombre ha robado cuanto menos 13 años de paz y los ha sustituido con dolor, dolor y más dolor y crisis que impactan a todo el mundo. Putin está intentando normalizar lo que debería haber terminado en el siglo XX, es decir, deportaciones masivas, ciudades y aldeas arrasadas, y ese sentimiento aterrador de que la guerra no va a terminar nunca. De hecho, Putin personifica la guerra. Todos sabemos que es la única razón por la cual siguen y persisten varias guerras y conflictos, y por qué todos los intentos para restaurar la paz han fracasado. Y eso no va a cambiar, él no va a cambiar. Nosotros somos los que debemos cambiar. Debemos cambiar para que la locura que reside en la mente de este hombre o de cualquier agresor no perdure. Putin es sincero sobre lo que desea, lo que hace y cuáles son sus objetivos. Su respuesta a la duración de la guerra es siempre la guerra, sin fin. Y lo quiere así. Su respuesta a los límites del caos en el mundo es el apoyo incondicional de las fuerzas terroristas. Disfruta de estos conflictos que causan sufrimiento a los otros, y su respuesta a los ofrecimientos de paz es suministrar más y más armas de Corea del Norte y de Irán. Estos regímenes como este existen mientras sigan librando guerras, y nosotros en el mundo libre continuaremos existiendo siempre y cuando podamos continuar defendiéndonos. Si hay alguien que piense que esto es solo o trata solo de Ucrania, están totalmente equivocados. Ya se han vislumbrado posibles direcciones, incluso calendarios, sobre otras agresiones de Rusia, más allá de Ucrania. Permítanme que les pregunte con franqueza, ¿qué nación europea hoy en día puede ofrecer un ejército preparado para combatir a la altura de la nuestra, para que frene a Rusia? ¿Y cuántos hombres y mujeres en sus naciones cuántas de sus naciones están dispuestos a enviar hombres y mujeres para defender a otro Estado, a otra nación? Si queremos luchar contra Putin en años venideros, ¿no sería mejor frenarlo a él y a esta estrategia bélica que tiene, mientras nuestros hombres y mujeres valientes ya lo están haciendo y combatiendo? Ellos son la oportunidad que necesita el mundo. Sin duda, en cualquier enfrentamiento, confrontación, siempre hay un momento en el que puede frenarse una catástrofe, y Ucrania es esa oportunidad. En el mundo libre, todos debemos ser inquebrantables a la hora de perseguir nuestros deseos, acciones y metas, de la misma manera que Putin tiene estas ambiciones apocalípticas. Nosotros, los ucranianos, empezamos a defendernos en un momento en el que casi nadie en el mundo creía en Ucrania. Pero hemos cambiado las tornas para que ahora el mundo deje de creer en Rusia. Incluso los colegas de Putin en Pyongyang y en Teherán utilizan su locura mientras todavía tiene tecnología y recursos para pagarles. Nadie cree en su futuro o invierte en ello. Y nosotros, todos nosotros hoy aquí, incluso más que ayer, debemos invertir en acercar la paz, una paz que sea justa y estable. Antes de esa invasión a gran escala, siempre oíamos que nos decían, no escalen. Cuando pedimos acciones más proactivas, sanciones para prevenir la expansión de la guerra, nos decían, no escalen. Y después del 24 de febrero, no hubo nada que dañase más nuestras coaliciones que esta noción. Cada vez que se nos decía que no escalásemos, sonaba como que nosotros venceríamos a Putin. Cuando pedimos nuevos tipos de armas y la respuesta era no escalen, bueno, pues las armas llegaron y no se produjo ninguna escalada. Llegó un misil ruso sobre territorio de la OTAN. La respuesta fue no escalen. Pero una represalia, algún tipo de represalia en aquel momento podría haber enseñado a Rusia muchísimo y hubiese aportado mayor confianza a Oeste. Hemos hablado del bloqueo de bienes sujetos a sanciones a Kaliningrado, pero siempre se nos decía que no escalásemos. Las sanciones podrían haber forzado a Putin con sus concesiones, pero con este tema de la no escalada siempre se pierde tiempo. Se han perdido muchísimas vidas, muchas desde que empezamos a luchar en 2014. Se han perdido muchas oportunidades. La lección es clara aquí. Todo el mundo pensaba que Rusia tenía misiles que no se podían abatir. Los Patriots abaten todo. Muchos temían las consecuencias si Ucrania tenía armas de largo alcance y como resultado Rusia perdería más. Hemos escuchado que Rusia nunca permitiría un corredor para cereales y luego pues casi 16 millones de toneladas de cargamento han sido transportadas desde nuestros puertos y hemos podido demostrar que Rusia pues ha tenido que aceptar la pérdida completa de su flota del Mar Negro, que ha aterrorizado a nuestros buques comerciales. Y también debemos obtener superioridad aérea para Ucrania, como lo hemos logrado en el Mar Negro. Y podemos hacerlo. Nuestros socios saben lo que se necesita y en qué cantidades. Y esto nos permitirá avanzar sobre el terreno. Hace 2 días, señoras y señores, justamente solo hace 2 días, demostramos que Ucrania puede llegar a los aviones militares más valiones rusos, algo que nunca se había batido antes. Hay muchas sanciones que se postergaron durante meses, incluso años, porque temían las amenazas de Moscú. Pero ninguna de esas amenazas se ha hecho realidad. Cada una de esas amenazas era un farol. ¿Y cómo podemos quedarnos satisfechos con las sanciones contra Rusia si no bloquean ni siquiera la producción de misiles? Si en cada misil ruso hay elementos, componentes críticos de países occidentales. Y eso es cierto, es un hecho. Por supuesto que estoy muy agradecido para cualquier paquete de sanciones y gracias a todos nuestros asociados, pero acercar la paz será la recompensa para todos aquellos que quieran asegurarse de que las sanciones funcionen al 100%. Y por cierto, hemos visto que hay una debilidad clara de Occidente, por ejemplo, cuando la industria nuclear de Rusia todavía no está sometida a sanciones, cuando Putin es el único terrorista que tomó una central nuclear como rehén. Este año será una decisión importante cuando los activos rusos se congelen, soberanos y oligárquicos, y se dirijan a defendernos contra la guerra rusa, para la construcción. A Putin le encanta el dinero. Cuantos más miles de millones él tenga y sus amigos y sus cómplices, y cuanto más dinero pierda, más se arrepentirá de esta guerra. Putin debe arrepentirse, debe perder. Debemos rebatir la idea de que la unidad global es más débil que el odio de un único hombre. Y podemos hacerlo, señoras y señores. Podemos. Este año debe ser decisivo. ¿Puede el hecho de congelar la guerra en Ucrania ser su fin? No quiero conformarme con la obviedad de que si se congela un conflicto, a lo mejor no empieza de nuevo. Les recuerdo que después de 2014 hubo intentos para congelar la guerra en Donbass. Había garantores muy influenciales en el proceso, con mucha influencia, como era el canciller de Alemania y el presidente de Francia en aquella época. Pero Putin es un depredador que no se conforma con productos congelados. Tenemos que defendernos y defender a nuestros hijos, nuestras casas, nuestras vidas. Y debemos hacerlo y podemos hacerlo. Podemos ganarle sobre el terreno. Ya lo hemos demostrado. Por mar y por aire. Hemos acelerado la producción de armas, hemos fortalecido nuestra economía, el PIB sigue aumentando pese a la guerra, un 5% más en comparación con el año pasado. Se nos ha aceptado para la negociación, para la adhesión a la Unión Europea y hemos normalizado la idea de que podemos combatir y derribar las agresiones de Rusia. Y ahora nosotros somos los que podemos decir, no escalen a todos aquellos que duden o que no quieran darnos apoyo. Y con ello, creo que tendremos razón, porque cada vez que reducimos la presión sobre la agresión, añade años y años a la guerra. Pero cada vez que invertimos en tener una mayor confianza en nuestros defensores, reduciremos el tiempo de la guerra. Este año debemos tomar una de las decisiones más importantes. La guerra va a terminar con una paz justa y estable. Y yo quiero que ustedes formen parte de este proceso de paz, empezando aquí, ahora, para acercarnos a la paz. Y les necesitamos a ustedes en Ucrania para reconstruir nuestras vidas. Cada uno de ustedes pueden tener más éxito con Ucrania. Y aquí, estos días, en un país tan maravilloso como es Suiza, hemos hecho una aportación política crucial para poner fin a la guerra. Hemos tenido una de las reuniones más representativas con consejeros de seguridad nacional en cuanto a la aplicación de una fórmula de paz que cuenta con más de 80 países e instituciones internacionales que estuvieron presentes. Ayer tuve unas negociaciones muy productivas con el presidente de Suiza. Tratamos la posibilidad de que se celebre una cumbre de alto nivel en Suiza, una cumbre mundial para la paz. Hoy nuestros equipos ya han empezado a trabajar para organizar dicha cumbre. No una cumbre sobre la Tercera Guerra Mundial, sino una cumbre mundial para la paz. E invito a cada líder y a cada país que respete la paz y el derecho internacional para que se sume a nuestros esfuerzos, porque juntos podemos responder a cualquiera de estos temas cruciales y encontrar las mejores respuestas. La paz debe ser la respuesta. Gracias por la invitación, gracias por su atención. Slava Ucrania.
Señor presidente, creo que habrá podido detectar el calor de este público